my ex-girlfriend reveal everything before my wife. On the 37th floor of a glass tower overlooking the cold winter skyline of Chicago, the marketing division of Halverson Strategic Dynamics believed it was a workplace built entirely on professionalism, ambition, and carefully curated LinkedIn smiles. For most employees, the office felt like a fast elevator that never stopped moving upward. Deadlines came and went like passing floors. Coffee machines hissed all day. Ambitions floated in the air along with the smell of printer ink and overpriced cologne. But beneath the polished surface, the building contained quiet rivalries, invisible alliances, and enough personal secrets to fill every cubicle drawer twice. Ethan Calder happened to be one of the few employees who tried to avoid all of that. At 32, Ethan had perfected the art of invisibility in corporate life. He worked efficiently, submitted reports before deadlines, avoided gossip, and maintained the type of polite friendliness that allowed coworkers to remember his name but rarely involve him in office drama. His desk sat near the large corner windows where winter sunlight reflected off nearby skyscrapers. Most afternoons, Ethan worked while watching the distant movement of Lake Michigan. It helped him remember that the world outside spreadsheets still existed. His life was calm, perhaps too calm. That calmness was exactly why his boss trusted him. The boss in question was Victor Halverson, founder of the company, and a man who appeared in business magazines often enough that employees joked the office printer probably recognized his face. Victor was a sharp-eyed strategist in his early 40s, known for building companies the way other people built chessboards. Every piece moved exactly where he wanted it. Employees respected him. Some feared him. A few admired him in the same way people admired storms from behind reinforced glass. But despite Victor's reputation for precision, there was one topic inside the company that employees quietly avoided mentioning. Victor Halverson once had a relationship that ended badly, very badly. Most employees knew only fragments of the story. Her name was Celeste Arden. Years ago, before the company expanded, Celeste had worked beside Victor during the chaotic early days of the business. Some people claimed she had been the creative force behind several successful campaigns. Others claimed she had been something far more complicated. The relationship ended suddenly. Celeste disappeared from the company as quickly as she had appeared, and Victor married someone else 2 years later. After that, nobody mentioned Celeste again, at least not until the last week of December. The annual New Year corporate celebration had always been the most chaotic night of the company calendar. The event rotated locations each year, but this time Victor reserved an extravagant downtown hotel ballroom overlooking the river. Employees received invitations printed on glossy black cards. The theme for the party was described as Midnight Velocity, which apparently meant silver decorations, glowing bar counters, and enough champagne to make human resources very nervous. For most employees, the event was simply an excuse to drink free alcohol and watch executives dance badly. But this particular year, the celebration carried an unexpected addition. Celeste Arden had returned to Chicago, and Victor had reluctantly invited her. Officially, the explanation was professional courtesy. Unofficially, the entire management floor seemed uncomfortable about it. Ethan Calder knew nothing about any of this. On the afternoon of December 31st, he remained focused on finishing a presentation scheduled for the first week of January. Outside his window, the city prepared for celebration. Inside the office, employees slowly abandoned their desks for the evening. By 6 o'clock, the floor had become strangely quiet. Ethan packed his laptop and prepared to leave when Victor Halverson unexpectedly appeared beside his desk. The boss rarely walked through cubicle rows personally. When he did, people noticed. Victor looked unusually serious. His expression carried the kind of quiet calculation Ethan usually associated with financial negotiations. Victor placed a hand on the edge of Ethan's desk. His voice remained calm and measured, though the tension behind it was impossible to ignore. He explained that the New Year party might become slightly unpredictable. Certain people attending the event occasionally enjoy creating unnecessary situations. Victor advised Ethan to remain polite but cautious. Ethan nodded, though he had no idea what the warning meant. Victor thanked him for his consistent professionalism and walked away toward the elevator. The conversation lasted less than a minute, but it left behind an invisible weight. Ethan spent the train ride downtown wondering why a CEO would give such a strangely vague warning. He arrived at the hotel ballroom shortly after 8. The location looked like a futuristic winter galaxy. Silver confetti already covered the floor. Glass chandeliers reflected hundreds of moving lights across polished walls. A DJ tested speakers that vibrated gently through the carpet. Employees filled the room wearing formal suits and dresses that looked slightly more glamorous than their normal office personalities. Within minutes, Ethan was handed a drink he had not asked for. The evening quickly transformed into a blur of laughter, music, and slightly awkward toward corporate dancing. Someone from accounting attempted a breakdance move and nearly collided with the dessert table. Several managers were already debating business strategies beside the open bar, though their ideas became less coherent with each refill. Ethan watched the scene with quiet amusement. Moments like this reminded him that professional adults could transform into enthusiastic chaos the moment free champagne appeared. Around 9:30, Victor Halverson entered the ballroom with his wife. His wife, Natalie Halverson, carried the composed elegance of someone accustomed to public attention. Her smile remained graceful and calm, even as employees approached to greet them. Victor looked relaxed, at least on the surface, but occasionally his eyes moved across the room as though expecting something or someone. That someone arrived 40 minutes later. The ballroom doors opened again, and Celeste Arden stepped inside. Before anyone recognized her, the atmosphere shifted slightly. Celeste possessed the kind of presence that seemed to bend attention in her direction without effort. She wore a dark emerald dress that contrasted against the silver decorations of the room. Her dark hair fell loosely over her shoulders. Her expression carried a calm confidence that suggested she enjoyed unpredictable situations. Within seconds, several older employees recognized her. Whispers traveled quietly through the room. Victor noticed her arrival immediately. For a brief moment, his expression hardened. Natalie noticed too, but Celeste simply walked calmly toward the bar as though returning to a familiar place. She accepted a drink and surveyed the room. Her gaze eventually stopped on Ethan Calder, perhaps because Ethan stood quietly near the window, observing the city lights rather than participating in corporate chaos, or perhaps because fate occasionally enjoyed creating unnecessary complications. Celeste walked toward him. Ethan noticed her approaching and assumed she was looking for someone else, but she stopped directly in front of him. Her expression carried a mixture of curiosity and amusement. Something about Ethan clearly interested her. Perhaps his calmness, perhaps his complete lack of awareness about the complicated history currently unfolding around him. Across the room, Victor Halverson saw the interaction begin. For the first time that evening, the confident CEO looked genuinely uneasy. The music grew louder, more champagne appeared, the countdown to midnight continued. But somewhere inside that crowded ballroom, an invisible chain reaction had already begun, because Celeste Arden had decided something very simple. The quiet man near the window would make the evening far more interesting, and unfortunately for Ethan Calder, the night was only getting started. By 10:15, the ballroom had become a carefully dressed disaster. The silver and black elegance of the hotel now sat under a layer of corporate chaos that no amount of luxury could hide. The DJ had abandoned subtle background music and fully committed to loud celebratory remixes. Men who spent all year speaking in strategic phrases were now balancing miniature crab cakes on cocktail napkins while nodding too seriously to songs from a decade earlier. 2 interns had already taken at least 50 photos beside an ice sculpture shaped like the number of the coming year. Someone from legal was explaining tax deductions to a decorative ficus. From the outside, it looked like harmless celebration. From the inside, it felt like a party slowly tilting off its foundation. Ethan Calder remained near the edges of the room, holding a second drink he had not intended to finish. That had been the pattern of the evening. Every time he set an empty glass down, another one somehow appeared in his hand through the mysterious generosity of co-workers who believed reserved people needed help loosening up. He still remembered Victor Halverson's warning at the office: remain polite but cautious. The advice had seemed theatrical when first delivered. Now, under the ballroom lights, with Celeste Arden standing only a few feet away at different moments of the evening, it felt like the beginning of an instruction manual that had forgotten to include the important pages. Celeste had not overwhelmed him all at once. That would have been too obvious. Instead, she moved through the room in elegant arcs, drifting between groups, speaking to former colleagues, smiling at people who looked equal parts delighted and terrified to see her. She seemed to know exactly how much attention to command and how much mystery to leave untouched. Every few minutes, her path crossed Ethan's. At first, it looked accidental. Then it looked strategic. By the third time, even Ethan could tell he had become part of some private game whose rules had not been explained to him. Her presence unsettled him in a way he could not easily define. She did not behave like someone trying too hard to be noticed. She behaved like someone who already knew she would be noticed and simply enjoyed observing who grew nervous first. The answer, apparently, was Victor. Across the ballroom, the CEO carried on with his duties as host. He greeted investors, thanked senior managers, shook hands with clients, and kept his expression under firm control. Yet every time Ethan glanced toward him, his attention had shifted again toward Celeste, or toward Ethan, or toward both. Natalie Halverson, Victor's wife, stood beside him for much of the evening with composed grace, but she too was observant. Her smile remained polished, though not careless. More than once, Ethan caught her studying the subtle currents moving through the room, as if she could sense the emotional geometry without seeing the full map. Near 11, Celeste finally stopped pretending coincidence had anything to do with her movements. She joined Ethan near a high glass table by the western windows, where the skyline reflected in the dark river below and the city lights looked almost unreal. Ethan did what he did best in uncomfortable situations. He became extremely polite. Celeste, however, seemed immune to polite distance. There was a playful sharpness about her, as though every expression contained a second meaning. She looked at the ballroom, then back at Ethan, and seemed amused by how completely unsuited he was for the role into which the evening was forcing him. He had the uncomfortable impression that she liked that. The more she lingered, the stranger the atmosphere became. A pair of co-workers from brand strategy walked by too slowly, pretending not to stare. An older executive nearly turned around mid-sentence while speaking to someone else. Even the bartender at the glowing counter seemed unusually attentive whenever Celeste lifted her empty glass. Then Victor approached. Not quickly, that would have revealed too much. He arrived with the smooth, controlled pace of a man determined to look casual while internally rewriting legal documents in his mind. His expression remained neutral, but the tension beneath it was now unmistakable. He placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder with the sort of professional familiarity that was meant to appear harmless in public and intimidating in private. Victor suggested that Ethan assist with a small matter involving next week's client packet, a request so obviously invented that even Ethan's mildly tipsy brain recognized it as an extraction attempt. Celeste looked entertained. Ethan, not wanting to cause awkwardness, allowed himself to be guided a short distance away toward a quieter corridor near the ballroom entrance where the music softened and the air felt less charged. There, Victor dropped the performance. The CEO did not raise his voice. He did not need to. His seriousness did the work for him. He made it clear in restrained and carefully chosen terms that Celeste Arden had a history of turning ordinary circumstances into long-burning disasters. He insisted that Ethan keep his distance, not because Ethan had done anything wrong, but because Celeste enjoyed provocation, especially where Victor was concerned. If she appeared unusually interested, it was not innocent. The advice should have clarified everything. Instead, it complicated it. Because before Ethan could decide how to respond, a small disaster happened almost on cue. Natalie Halverson appeared at the corridor entrance. She had not heard the entire exchange, but she had heard enough. Victor, standing in private with a younger male employee, the words Celeste, distance, interested, not innocent. The fragments landed in the worst possible order. Natalie's expression did not explode into visible anger. That would have been simpler. Instead, something much more dangerous crossed her face, composed confusion, the kind that quietly starts constructing explanations before facts can catch up. Victor noticed immediately. Ethan noticed 1 second later. The moment collapsed under its own tension. Victor moved toward Natalie with the urgent calm of a man who knew misunderstanding was already breeding. Ethan stood frozen with the sinking realization that somehow, in less than an hour, he had become an unwilling accessory to a marital misunderstanding involving a billionaire CEO, his elegant wife, and the boss's former girlfriend. The absurdity of it might have been funny if it had not felt so unstable. Back inside the ballroom, the mood surged toward midnight recklessness. Someone had started an office pool over which department would produce the first embarrassing social media video. The answer turned out to be operations when a vice president attempted to sing while standing on a chair that had not consented to such responsibility. Near the dessert station, 2 junior associates argued over whether a chocolate fountain counted as a strategic asset. A man from finance walked directly into a decorative mirror and apologized to his own reflection. Ethan might have laughed more if he had not felt the ground shifting beneath the party. Celeste found him again. This time there was no playful distance in the timing. She stepped back into his orbit with the confidence of someone who knew the room was now unstable and intended to keep it that way. He had begun to understand one thing about her. She never seemed rushed. Even while events thickened around her, she moved with eerie patience, as though the evening were unfolding according to some private tempo only she could hear. By 11:30, the champagne had done measurable damage to everyone's judgment, including Natalie's. Victor's wife had always maintained elegant restraint in public, but alcohol had softened that restraint into something looser and more vulnerable. She was not drunk in the chaotic sense. She was worse, thoughtful in a dangerous way. Her eyes had gained the bright, fragile shine of someone trying to remain composed while carrying too many doubts at once. Celeste approached Natalie near the bar. The interaction lasted only a short while. No one near enough could hear clearly over the music, but whatever Celeste said changed the air. Natalie's expression shifted from uncertainty to disbelief, then to something like wounded humiliation. She did not create a scene, she simply stared, took another drink she clearly did not need, and walked away more quickly than before. Victor noticed too late. Ethan, trapped by proximity and bad luck, watched the sequence unfold with growing dread. What had Celeste told her? A partial truth from years ago? A distorted confession? A carefully placed implication? Whatever it was, it landed with precision. The countdown clock projected above the ballroom now showed less than 30 minutes until midnight. The party grew louder. The atmosphere grew stranger. Ethan made a practical decision. He needed water, distance, and preferably an exit route. He slipped away from the central floor and found refuge near an auxiliary lounge outside the main ballroom, where oversized chairs surrounded low glass tables and a television silently displayed the city's public countdown events. The quieter space should have helped. It did not, because Celeste followed him there. She entered without hurry, carrying a fresh glass and an expression that suggested this was the moment she had wanted all evening. In the softer light of the lounge, away from the crowd, she looked less like a glamorous party guest and more like someone carrying old, unfinished weather inside her. For the first time that night, Ethan felt the full weight of her attention. It was not simple attraction, at least not only that. There was loneliness in it, and mischief, and something bruised beneath the surface. The kind of emotional complication that makes sensible people step backward and curious people step closer. Unfortunately, Ethan was tired, half distracted, and just disoriented enough to remain where he was. Celeste leaned near enough for the air to tighten. Her gaze held his in a way that made the rest of the hotel seem very far away. And then, with the ease of someone dropping a lit match into dry grass, she revealed the first true fracture of the night. Years ago, Victor had not simply ended things with her. He had chosen ambition over ruin, silence over scandal, and marriage over consequences. She suggested that what Natalie had just learned was not even the ugliest part. Before Ethan could fully absorb what that meant, she shifted the evening into an even more dangerous direction. Whether from drink, old longing, revenge, or some combination too tangled to name, Celeste made her intentions towards Ethan unmistakably personal. Not teasing, not ambiguous, personal. The proposal was not grand or romantic in the traditional sense. It emerged through the haze of New Year excess, reckless and intimate and completely impossible. It had the dangerous energy of a woman deciding, in one impulsive yet strangely deliberate moment, that the easiest way to hurt the past was to claim something new in front of it. Ethan stood motionless, shocked less by the attraction itself than by the timing, the madness, and the sheer catastrophic elegance of the mess. At that exact moment, the lounge entrance darkened. Victor was there. Behind him, several steps away, stood Natalie, and behind her, drifting in from the ballroom with the soundtrack of midnight approaching, came a small cluster of employees who had accidentally arrived just in time to witness enough of the scene to misunderstand all of it. Nobody said anything. Nobody needed to. The silence was bigger than any confrontation could have been. The final 10 minutes before midnight began to feel like a fuse burning under expensive carpet. Victor's face had gone pale with controlled fury. Natalie looked as if she were now certain of something and uncertain of everything. The employees in the doorway wore the haunted expressions of people who knew they were seeing office history happen live. And Ethan Calder, who had entered the party hoping only to survive some networking and free appetizers, suddenly understood that he had become the center of a corporate implosion with confetti. Then, from inside the ballroom, the crowd began shouting the countdown rehearsal. 10, 9, 8... The whole hotel seemed to vibrate, and just before the new year could arrive, before the confetti cannons burst and the midnight lights exploded over the river, Ethan noticed one final detail that turned his confusion into real fear. Celeste was smiling, not like someone drunk, not like someone embarrassed, like someone who had planned for the mess to break open right here. And somewhere beyond the ballroom wall, hidden beneath music and laughter and the collapsing dignity of management, something worse than romantic scandal was already moving toward them. Because on Victor Halverson's phone, forgotten for the moment in the chaos, a message had just appeared from an unknown number. It contained only a photograph taken inside the hotel that very night. And in the background of that photograph, reflected faintly in mirrored glass behind Celeste and Ethan, stood the outline of a person who should not have been there at all. The final seconds before midnight had always been the most predictable moment of every New Year celebration. Music grew louder, people gathered closer together, glasses lifted into the air, and strangers temporarily believed the world might reset itself when the clock changed. But inside the quiet lounge outside the ballroom, predictability had disappeared. Ethan Calder stood frozen between three different disasters. Behind him stood Celeste Argan, calm and unsettlingly amused by the situation she had helped ignite. In front of him stood Victor Halverson, his normally controlled composure stretched thin beneath a storm of restrained anger. And just beyond Victor, Natalie Halverson watched everything with the slow, fragile disbelief of someone whose understanding of the evening had shattered too many times in too short a period. The hallway lights seemed colder now. Even the distant music from the ballroom sounded different, as if the celebration belonged to another world entirely. Employees gathering near the entrance had begun whispering amongst themselves. They did not understand the full story, but they understood enough to sense that something important was unfolding. And corporate employees loved two things more than productivity: rumors and spectacle. Inside the ballroom, the crowd began chanting the final countdown. 10, 9, 8. The numbers echoed through the walls like distant thunder. Victor's attention shifted from Ethan to Celeste with the sharp focus of someone trying to prevent a situation from sliding completely out of control. Years of discipline held his voice steady, even though his eyes carried visible strain. He did not shout, he did not accuse, but the tension between them felt older than the party, older than the building itself. Natalie looked from Victor to Celeste and then to Ethan, attempting to assemble a story from fragments that refused to align properly. The alcohol in her system had not made her reckless, but it had weakened the quiet emotional armor she usually carried so well. And Celeste watched all of it with a strange calmness, not the calm of innocence, the calm of someone who had already accepted that the night would explode. 3, 2, 1. The entire ballroom erupted. Through the open doorway, the sound of celebration crashed into the hallway like a wave. Confetti cannons fired, music surged to full volume, and hundreds of voices shouted together as the new year arrived. Midnight. From the windows overlooking the river, distant fireworks flashed across the sky. Silver confetti drifted into the lounge like quiet snow. The moment should have been joyful. Instead, it felt like the official beginning of something much messier. Natalie turned away first, not dramatically, not angrily, just slowly, as if she suddenly needed air more than answers. Victor followed her instinctively, abandoning the confrontation for the more urgent task of preventing his marriage from collapsing in front of half the company. Within seconds, they disappeared into the ballroom crowd. The small audience of employees outside the lounge also retreated, realizing they had witnessed something they would spend the next 6 months exaggerating. The hallway emptied, leaving only Ethan and Celeste standing beneath the falling confetti. The music inside the ballroom now carried the chaotic energy of a party that had officially crossed into the reckless hours. Someone had already started a conga line that was traveling dangerously close to the dessert table. Ethan exhaled slowly. The absurdity of the situation finally caught up with him. Only 2 hours earlier, he had been a quiet marketing analyst planning to return home before midnight. Now, he was apparently the accidental centerpiece of a scandal involving his boss, his boss's wife, and a woman whose motives he barely understood. He felt like someone who had wandered into the wrong movie halfway through. Ethan leaned casually against the wall beside him. The bright celebration from the ballroom reflected faintly in his eyes, but her attention remained fixed on him with unsettling focus. Whatever game she had started earlier in the evening had clearly not finished yet. Ethan tried to organize his thoughts. The situation felt unstable in ways he could not fully explain. Victor's warning earlier in the office returned to him with uncomfortable clarity. Celeste enjoyed provocation, especially where Victor was concerned, and tonight she had succeeded beyond expectation. Yet something about her behavior did not match simple revenge. There was calculation in it, something deliberate beneath the chaos. Before Ethan could ask the questions forming in his mind, Celeste straightened from the wall and moved toward the balcony doors at the end of the lounge. The doors opened onto a narrow outdoor terrace overlooking the river, where the cold winter air cut through the lingering warmth of the hotel. Ethan followed, partly out of confusion and partly out of curiosity he could no longer suppress. Outside, the night looked alive with celebration. Fireworks burst over the skyline, their reflections trembling across the water below. The sound of distant cheering echoed between buildings. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The cold air cleared Ethan's head slightly. He realized how strange the evening truly was. Celeste had returned to a party hosted by the man she once loved. Within 2 hours, she had destabilized his marriage, embarrassed him in front of employees, and involved a completely unrelated coworker in the process. And yet, she did not look triumphant. She looked thoughtful, almost tired. She watched the fireworks with quiet concentration before turning back toward Ethan. Something about the moment shifted. The playful tension that had surrounded her earlier faded slightly, replaced by a more serious energy. The story she began explaining was not loud or dramatic. It was simply complicated. Years earlier, during the early expansion of Halverson's strategic dynamics, the company had nearly collapsed under a scandal involving stolen campaign strategies and illegal data collection. The incident never reached public news because Victor handled it privately. But the price of that silence had been high. Someone had taken the blame, Celeste. The official explanation at the time had been that she left the company voluntarily after a professional disagreement. In reality, she had been pushed out to protect Victor's rising reputation. Victor later rebuilt the company, married Natalie, expanded the business into something respected. Celeste disappeared from the industry entirely. Ethan listened with growing unease. The story sounded less like revenge and more like unfinished history finally resurfacing. But that still did not explain tonight's performance, the flirtation, the proposal, the calculated chaos. Celeste finally revealed the part that made the evening truly dangerous. She had not come to the party just to embarrass Victor. She had come because someone had contacted her 2 weeks earlier with evidence about that old scandal. Evidence that suggested Victor had not been the only person responsible. And the person who sent the information claimed to have proof that someone inside the company was now preparing to expose everything publicly. The photograph on Victor's phone suddenly made sense. Someone inside the hotel had been watching them, someone who knew the past, someone who wanted the right moment to destroy Victor Halverson's carefully built empire. Ethan felt the cold wind more sharply now. The situation was no longer merely awkward, it was dangerous. Celeste admitted something else then. The reason she approached Ethan earlier in the evening had not been entirely spontaneous. She had been watching him during the first hour of the party. He looked calm, uninvolved, the type of employee no one suspected of playing political games. If someone inside the company was preparing to reveal secrets, Ethan would be one of the few people close enough to observe strange behavior without attracting attention. Which meant that, intentionally or not, he had now become part of something much larger than office gossip. Ethan looked back toward the ballroom windows. Through the glass, he could see employees laughing, dancing, celebrating the new year without any idea that the foundations of their company might soon crack open. Inside that room stood Victor Halverson, a powerful CEO with a hidden past. Inside that room also stood Natalie, who now believed her husband might be hiding far more than an old relationship. And somewhere inside the hotel, a mysterious observer was documenting everything. Ethan suddenly realized the worst part. Celeste had not created the mess, she had simply accelerated it. The real explosion was still coming. Behind them, the balcony door opened suddenly. Both of them turned. Victor Halverson stepped onto the terrace. His expression had changed. The anger was still there, but now something heavier sat behind it. Concern. He held his phone in his hand. The screen displayed the photograph from the anonymous message. Victor showed it to them without speaking. The image clearly showed the ballroom earlier that night. But in the mirrored reflection behind Ethan and Celeste stood a tall figure wearing a dark coat and watching them carefully from across the room. Victor had already confirmed something terrifying. That man was not on the guest list, and security cameras had not recorded him entering the hotel, which meant only one thing. Someone inside the company had helped him get in. The fireworks outside continued exploding over the river. Inside the ballroom, the party raged louder than ever. But on the cold balcony overlooking Chicago, 3 people now understood the truth. The New Year's celebration had just become the opening act of a corporate disaster that could destroy careers, marriages, and an entire company. And somewhere inside the hotel, the man in the photograph was still watching. The fireworks over Chicago slowly faded into smoke above the river. From the terrace outside the ballroom, the city still looked festive and alive. Car horns echoed from the streets below, distant crowds shouted in celebration, and the glass towers across the skyline flickered with midnight lights. But on the narrow balcony outside the hotel ballroom, the air had turned heavy. Victor Halverson stood motionless with his phone still glowing in his hand. The photograph on the screen refused to become less disturbing the longer they looked at it. Reflections in the mirrored wall inside the ballroom revealed a tall figure standing near the far corner of the room earlier that evening. The man wore a long, dark coat that looked almost out of place among the polished suits and evening dresses of the party. His face was not fully visible, but his posture suggested something very clear. He had been watching Ethan and Celeste, not casually, carefully. The most unsettling detail was what Victor had already confirmed through a quick call to the hotel's event coordinator only minutes earlier. The guest list for the party had been strict. Security at the elevators required verification from hotel staff. Every invited employee, client, and partner had been registered in advance. The man in the photograph did not appear on that list, which meant he had entered the event with help from someone inside the company. The realization turned the celebration into something colder. Ethan felt the uncomfortable sensation of standing inside a situation that was expanding faster than anyone present could control. Celeste watched Victor quietly. Her expression no longer carried the playful edge she had worn earlier in the evening. Whatever personal drama she had intended to create with Victor had now collided with something larger and more dangerous. Victor exhaled slowly, the breath forming a faint cloud in the winter air. For a man known for commanding boardrooms and controlling billion-dollar negotiations, the uncertainty on his face was rare. He looked back toward the ballroom through the glass doors. Inside, the party had reached its wildest stage. The DJ had abandoned subtlety and was now playing loud dance music that shook the chandelier slightly. Groups of employees shouted over the music while trying to capture selfies under falling confetti. Someone from accounting was attempting to spin a coworker around in celebration and nearly collided with a waiter carrying a tray of champagne flutes. The entire room looked carefree, which meant the intruder had chosen the perfect moment to hide. Victor made a quiet decision. Instead of confronting the situation publicly, he stepped back inside the ballroom with the calm determination of someone preparing to investigate quietly. Ethan and Celeste followed. The party atmosphere swallowed them immediately. Music roared. People laughed. No one noticed that the CEO of the company had just begun scanning the room like a detective. Victor moved through the crowd slowly, careful not to appear suspicious. His eyes studied every corner of the ballroom, every shadow near the walls, every unfamiliar face among the employees. Ethan stayed a few steps behind, unsure whether he was helping or simply witnessing the beginning of a corporate disaster. Celeste walked beside him, her gaze equally sharp now. Minutes passed. The mysterious man did not appear again. Either he had already left, or he had blended into the crowd in a way that made him impossible to identify. Victor eventually reached the far side of the ballroom, near the mirrored wall where the photograph had been taken earlier. The reflection there showed the entire room, and for a moment, everything looked ordinary. Then, Ethan noticed something strange. Near the bar counter stood a man from the company's technology department named Marcus Delaney. Marcus was known in the office as a quiet systems engineer who rarely attended social events. He spent most of his time in server rooms, maintaining internal networks and security infrastructure, which made his presence at the party slightly unusual. But that alone was not the strange part. Marcus kept glancing toward the elevators, not casually, nervously. His behavior stood out in a room filled with drunk dancing employees who had already forgotten about work entirely. Celeste noticed it too. Victor followed their gaze. Marcus Delaney suddenly realized he was being observed. His expression shifted. For a brief second, panic flickered across his face before he forced himself to look normal again. But the damage had already been done. Victor moved toward him. The path through the crowd felt longer than it should have been. When Victor reached the bar, Marcus was gone. The elevator doors at the far end of the hallway closed quietly. Marcus Delaney had left the party. Victor stared toward the elevators with controlled anger. It did not prove anything yet, but the timing felt too precise to ignore. Ethan suddenly remembered something Celeste had mentioned earlier on the balcony. Someone inside the company had helped the mysterious observer enter the hotel. Marcus worked in the department responsible for internal security systems. If anyone inside the company could manipulate access permissions, disable monitoring alerts, or allow someone into a private corporate event without being noticed, it would be someone like Marcus Delaney. Ethan immediately pulled out his phone and attempted to contact the hotel's security desk, but before he could finish the call, another message appeared on his screen. Another unknown number. Another photograph. This time, the image showed something even more disturbing. It was a picture of Victor and Celeste standing together years earlier inside a small office. The image looked like it had been taken secretly through a partially open door. The timestamp on the photograph revealed the date. It had been taken the night before Celeste disappeared from the company. Under the photograph appeared a short message, a message that carried the quiet confidence of someone who believed they held all the leverage. The message stated that the past could not remain buried forever. It suggested that the story behind the company's early success might soon interest certain journalists, and it promised that the next piece of evidence would appear very soon. Victor's face hardened. Celeste read the message over his shoulder. Ethan felt the tension growing heavier. The old scandal Celeste mentioned earlier was no longer simply history. Someone was preparing to reopen it publicly, and the person orchestrating everything clearly had access to private records and old evidence, which meant the problem was not limited to one nervous engineer leaving a party early. The entire company might be compromised. Meanwhile, across the ballroom, another complication quietly unfolded. Natalie Halverson stood near the large windows overlooking the river. She had been watching Victor from across the room for several minutes. Her earlier confusion about the situation had now mixed with something more dangerous, suspicion. From her perspective, the evening had revealed too many secrets at once. Her husband's past relationship, Celeste's sudden reappearance, the strange confrontation in the lounge. Now Victor appeared to be secretly discussing something urgently with both Celeste and Ethan. To Natalie, the scene looked like a conspiracy she had not been invited to understand. And alcohol had weakened her patience. She began walking toward them. Ethan noticed first. Victor turned. Celeste sighed softly, recognizing that the evening's emotional chaos was about to become even worse. Natalie stopped in front of them with the composed fury of someone determined to uncover the truth immediately. Around them, employees continued celebrating, completely unaware that the company's leadership was standing on the edge of personal and professional collapse. Victor prepared to explain everything. But before he could speak, Ethan's phone vibrated in his pocket. He pulled it out instinctively. The message displayed on his screen came from the same unknown number that had contacted Victor, which meant whoever was behind the messages knew exactly who Ethan was. The message contained only a single line, a line that made Ethan's stomach drop instantly. It read, "Ask your boss why Celeste really disappeared." Ethan slowly lifted his eyes. Victor and Celeste both saw the message. Natalie saw their reaction. The tension between the four of them snapped into something dangerously fragile. And somewhere outside the hotel, far below the glittering skyline of Chicago, the man in the dark coat stood beside a parked car, watching the lights of the ballroom windows above. His plan was working perfectly. The company's past had begun to crack open. The marriage of Victor Halverson had begun to fracture. And the quiet employee named Ethan Calder had become the perfect witness. Because the next move would destroy more than reputations. It would expose a secret that had been buried for nearly 10 years. And once that secret reached the public, no one inside Halverson's strategic dynamics would escape the fallout. The celebration inside the ballroom continued long after midnight. Music grew louder, laughter became less controlled, and the confetti on the floor slowly turned into a silver carpet beneath hundreds of careless footsteps. But the small circle standing near the windows, Victor Halverson, Natalie Halverson, Celeste Arden, and Ethan Calder, felt completely separate from the celebration. The message on Ethan's phone had shifted the entire atmosphere. Ask your boss why Celeste really disappeared. The words hung in the air like a question that had waited years to be asked. Natalie looked from Ethan's phone to Victor. For the first time that night, the confusion in her expression hardened into certainty that something important had been hidden from her. Victor understood immediately that the situation had reached the point where silence would only make everything worse. He moved slightly away from the noise of the ballroom and gestured for the others to follow him toward a quieter corridor beside the elevators. The elevator lighting was dimmer, calmer, almost unreal compared to the chaotic celebration happening behind the doors. Victor stopped and finally spoke with the heavy honesty of someone who knew the past had caught up with him. Nearly 10 years earlier, during the early days of Halverson's strategic dynamics, the company had been struggling to secure a massive advertising contract that could determine its survival. At the same time, a competing agency had been secretly collecting confidential data about several clients using illegal methods. Victor had discovered the operation, but instead of reporting it immediately, he had made a decision that changed everything. He had quietly copied some of that illegally obtained information and used it to secure the contract for his own company. The decision worked. The company survived. The contract launched Halverson's strategic dynamics into national success. But the illegal data trail eventually surfaced. Someone had to take responsibility, and Celeste Arden had stepped forward. The official story said she had left the company voluntarily after a disagreement. In reality, she had taken the blame to protect Victor's future and the survival of the company they had built together. Victor had promised her the truth would remain buried forever. Natalie listened in stunned silence. The man she had married had built his empire on a decision that could have destroyed everything if it had become public. Celeste stood quietly beside Ethan. Her expression carried no anger now, only the quiet exhaustion of someone who had lived with that decision for years. The message on Ethan's phone suddenly made sense. Someone had discovered the old evidence, someone who knew the entire history, and that person was preparing to expose it. Victor's phone vibrated again, another message from the unknown number. This time, the message included a location, a parking garage beneath the hotel, and a simple instruction: come alone if you want the evidence. Victor looked at the message and immediately began walking toward the elevators. Ethan followed without thinking. Celeste followed as well. Natalie hesitated only a moment before joining them. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have been. When the doors opened into the underground parking level, the festive sounds of the party above disappeared completely. The garage was quiet. Cold concrete pillars stretched into dim lighting, and the sound of distant city traffic echoed faintly through the entrance ramp. Near the far end of the garage, a dark sedan waited with its headlights off. Beside the car stood the tall man from the photograph, the dark coat, the same calm posture. Victor walked toward him slowly. The man did not look surprised. In fact, he looked almost amused. Under the harsh garage lighting, his face finally became clear. Ethan recognized him immediately. Not from the office, from a company newsletter several years earlier. The man had once worked for Halverson Strategic Dynamics. His name was Daniel Mercer. 10 years ago, Daniel had been a junior analyst in the company's research department, the same department that had quietly handled client data during the early contract negotiations. Daniel explained the rest with unsettling calm. He had discovered the illegal data transfer years earlier while auditing internal systems. Before he could report it, Celeste had already taken the blame and left the company. Victor had buried the evidence. Daniel had remained silent, but he had never forgotten. Over the years, he watched the company grow into a massive corporate success while the truth remained hidden. He did not want money. He did not want revenge. He wanted exposure. The evidence he had collected could destroy the company's reputation and send Victor into a legal nightmare. He planned to release everything to several journalists within 24 hours. Victor stood quietly for several seconds. Then something unexpected happened. Instead of arguing, threatening, or trying to negotiate, Victor admitted the truth openly. He confirmed every part of Daniel's story: the illegal data, Celeste's sacrifice, the hidden past of the company. Victor resigned immediately. The announcement shocked the entire industry, but something unexpected happened afterwards. Instead of collapsing, the company survived. Clients respected the honesty. The board appointed temporary leadership, and Celeste Arden was invited back to the company, not as a scapegoat, but as a senior strategist whose contributions had finally been recognized. Natalie remained distant from Victor for a long time, but the honesty of his confession had changed something. Their future remained uncertain, but it was no longer built on lies. As for Ethan Calder, his quiet life in the marketing department never returned to normal. Within a few weeks, employees began joking that the most dangerous place in the company was standing near Ethan at office parties, because somehow, without trying, he had witnessed the biggest corporate scandal in the company's history. On his desk one morning, Ethan found a small note. Celeste had left it there before leaving for a meeting. The note simply said that next year's New Year party would probably be less dramatic. Probably. Ethan looked out the window toward the city skyline and laughed quietly, because after surviving the night when confetti revealed too many secrets, he had learned one important thing. Office parties were far more dangerous than spreadsheets, and sometimes the quietest employee in the room ended up standing exactly where history decided to explode. The end.